I came home to find my late wife's sewing machine gone, the one she used every single day for 31 years. My daughter-in-law was standing in the kitchen, smiling, and said, "Oh, that old thing? I sold it at the garage sale this morning." "You're welcome, Dad." The clutter was getting ridiculous. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a door. I just set my keys down on the counter, looked at her, and said, "I see." Because in that moment, I already knew exactly what kind of person I was dealing with, and I already knew they had no idea what I was about to do next. But let me start from the beginning. Before the morning, everything changed. Before I tell you what I had planned, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to subscribe and let me know where you're listening from. Every story I share is real, and if even one of them reminds you that quiet people can fight back, then it was worth telling. My name is Gerald. I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years working as an electrician, mostly commercial jobs, schools, and hospitals, and the occasional office building. My hands are rough and my knees don't cooperate the way they used to, but my mind is sharp. People tend to forget that part when they see the gray hair and the slow walk. That's their mistake, not mine. My wife, Carol, passed 4 years ago, ovarian cancer. She fought it for 2 years, with the kind of quiet bravery that made everyone around her feel ashamed for ever complaining about small things. The last gift she gave me was a Tuesday afternoon in October, sitting together on our back porch, watching the leaves come down off the old maple tree she'd planted the year our son was born. She held my hand and said, "Gerald, don't let anybody make you small. You're not built that way." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. I do now. Our son, my son, moved back in 14 months after Carol passed. He was 34 years old, married 2 years to his wife, and they had what he described as a temporary financial situation. His words, not mine. I said yes without hesitation, because that's what I'd always done. The house had 3 bedrooms, more space than one man needed, and I thought maybe the company would help with the silence that had settled into every room since Carol left. His wife was pleasant enough in the beginning. She helped with groceries, kept the kitchen cleaner than I ever had, and made Sunday dinners that filled the house with the kind of warmth I'd been missing. I told myself I was lucky. Not every man in my situation gets to have his family around him. I counted my blessings and kept my mouth shut about the smaller things. The rearranged furniture, the new throw pillows I never asked for, the slow disappearance of anything that didn't match her taste in decorating. Carol's sewing corner was in the small room off the hallway, the one we'd always called the sitting room. Carol had made curtains, quilts, Christmas stockings, Halloween costumes, and more birthday gifts than I could count in that room. The sewing machine was a 1962 Singer that her own mother had passed down to her, and Carol kept it polished and running like new. After she died, I kept that room exactly the way she'd left it, thread still in the needle. The little wooden box of buttons she'd collected over the years still sitting on the windowsill. I wasn't ready to change any of it, and I didn't think I needed anyone's permission to leave it alone. I'd been gone for 3 days, visiting an old friend of mine who lives about 4 hours north, up near the lake country. We go fishing every fall if the weather allows it. I called home once while I was gone, just to check in, and my daughter-in-law said everything was fine. My son wasn't home when I called, which I thought was a little odd since it was a Sunday evening, but I let it go. When I pulled into the driveway late on Wednesday afternoon, I noticed the garage door was open, and there were a few boxes stacked near the curb, the kind you leave out after a garage sale. My chest went tight before I even made it to the front door, but I told myself I was being dramatic. Maybe she'd cleaned out her own boxes. Maybe it had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with me. The sewing machine was gone. The little button box was gone. The quilt Carol had been working on when she got sick, half-finished, folded over the arm of the chair the way she always left it, was gone. The whole room had been swept clean and repainted, a shade of pale blue I'd never agreed to, and in the corner where the singer had sat for 4 years, sat a small white desk with a laptop computer and a ring light. She'd turned Carol's sewing room into a home office. I stood in the doorway for a long time. I didn't trust my voice yet, so I didn't use it. I walked to the kitchen, set my bag down, and stood at the counter. She came in from the backyard a few minutes later, carrying an empty cardboard box, and that's when she said it. That old thing. The clutter was getting ridiculous. "You're welcome, Dad." I looked at her. I said, "I see." And then I asked where my son was. "He was at the gym," she said. "He'd be home by 6. I nodded and went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were trembling. Not from anger, not yet, but from something older and harder to name. Grief has a way of living quietly inside you for years, and then something small, or something that looks small to everyone else, rips it back open. I sat there in the late afternoon light and thought about Carol at that machine. The sound of it running, that steady mechanical hum, had been one of the most constant sounds of our life together for over 3 decades. I'd heard it so many times I'd stopped noticing it, and now it was gone to some stranger at a sidewalk sale for probably $15, and nobody had asked me a single thing about it. When my son came home, I was sitting in the living room. He saw my face, and I watched his smile fade before he'd even taken his shoes off. "Hey, Dad, when did you get back?" "A few hours ago," I said. He glanced toward the kitchen. "Did she tell you about the room?" "We thought it would be a good use of the space. She's been working from home more, and she sold your mother's sewing machine," I said. The room went quiet. "It wasn't something we were using," he said carefully. "And the room, it wasn't something you were using," I said. "It belonged to me. The machine, the quilts, the buttons, all of it. None of that was yours to sell or give away or throw in the trash." He sat down across from me, running a hand through his hair the way he always did when he was uncomfortable. "Dad, it's just stuff. Mom's been gone 4 years. You can't keep a shrine forever." That word landed like a stone. Shrine. "Your mother worked at that machine 2 weeks before she went into hospice," I said. "She was making a quilt for your birthday. I don't know if you knew that." He didn't say anything. "She never finished it," I said. "I kept it exactly the way she left it because I wasn't ready to let go. That was my right. In my house." My daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway. She had that carefully neutral expression that people wear when they're trying to seem reasonable while knowing they've done something wrong. "Gerald," she said, "I genuinely thought you'd appreciate having the space cleared. I should have asked. I realize that." She said it the way you'd apologize for forgetting to replace the paper towels. "Where is it?" I asked. "I sold it this morning. A woman gave me $40 for it." I thought, $40. It was old. It wasn't worth anything at the... "Get out of my house," I said. The room went still as a photograph. My son stood up. "Dad, not tonight," I said. "I'm not throwing anyone out tonight. But this conversation isn't over, and before it is, you are both going to understand something very clearly. This is my house. My name is on the deed. My hands built the back deck. My money replaced the roof twice. And no one in this house sells, moves, or throws away a single thing that belonged to me or my wife without asking me first. That is not a request." I stood up, went to my room, and closed the door. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, and I thought about what Carol had said on the porch. "Don't let anybody make you small." I thought about the 47 months since she'd been gone, and all the small things I'd let slide. The furniture moved without asking. The photographs taken down because they didn't match the new decor. The slow, patient transformation of my home into something I no longer recognized. I'd told myself it was compromise. I'd told myself it was generosity. But lying there in the dark, I started to wonder if it had been something else entirely. The next morning, I drove over to see my neighbor, an older man named Clifton, who'd been a real estate attorney for 35 years before he retired. He was 81, slow on his feet, fast in his head, and he had a habit of listening without interrupting that I'd always appreciated. I told him everything over coffee at his kitchen table. He listened. He asked 3 or 4 questions. Then he looked at me and said, "Gerald, do you know what's actually in your house right now? I mean financially. Have you looked at your own accounts lately?" I hadn't. "Not in a few months." "Go home," he said, "and look at everything. Your bank statements, your insurance, anything that's been moved or changed in the last year. Then come back and tell me what you find." I drove home and started looking. What I found took me the better part of 2 days to fully understand. 3 of Carol's jewelry pieces were missing from the box in my closet. Not all of them, just the ones with obvious value. A pearl necklace, a gold bracelet, and the small diamond earrings I'd given her on our 25th anniversary. I'd assumed they were still there. I hadn't checked in months. 2 of my father's woodworking tools, a hand plane, and a set of chisels he'd brought over from Tennessee when I was a boy, were not in the garage where they'd always been. I'd assumed they were simply moved. They weren't anywhere in the house. And then I found the credit card statement. It was mixed into a pile of papers on the kitchen counter, already opened, for a card in my name that I had not applied for. The balance was $11,000. The charges went back 7 months. Restaurants, online shopping, a weekend hotel stay, a furniture delivery to an address I didn't recognize. My hands went cold. I sat at the kitchen table with the statement in front of me, and I breathed very slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way Carol used to tell me when I was getting worked up about something. Slow down, Gerald. Think first. I thought first. That evening I went back to Clifton's house with everything I'd found. The credit card statement. The list of missing items. Photographs I'd taken of empty drawers and bare walls and the garage shelves where my father's tools had been. He looked through it all, made a few notes on a legal pad, and said nothing for a long time. Gerald, he said finally, do you want to know what I think is happening here? I think I already know, I said. Then you know this isn't carelessness. This has been going on too long and involves too many things. Someone made decisions about what was worth taking and what wasn't. That's not an accident. That's a system. My son, the boy I'd taught to change a tire and check his oil and treat people with decency, standing in front of me with his eyes on the floor while his wife apologized for $40. I didn't say anything to either of them that night. I went to the hardware store the next morning and had new locks put on my bedroom door and on the room where Carol's sewing corner used to be. I put the credit card statement in a folder, and I started a new folder, one document at a time, photographs and dates and amounts and notes. Then I called my daughter. My daughter, Renee, is 3 years younger than my son, and about 100 years more clear-eyed. She'd never fully trusted my daughter-in-law, had said so plainly at the wedding, and then kept her opinion to herself after that because she understood it wasn't her life to manage. She lived in Nashville, 3 states away, working as an accountant. When I told her what I'd found, she went quiet for a moment, and then she said, Dad, send me copies of everything, all of it. I'm coming this weekend. She came on Friday. By Saturday afternoon, she had a picture of things that made the credit card statement look like the beginning of a much longer story. My son had been depositing small amounts of cash into an account I didn't know about. Amounts that corresponded closely to the missing jewelry and the tools, and a few other items I hadn't even noticed yet. The new account had been opened 11 months ago. Renee found this not through any illegal means, but because my son, it turned out, had accidentally used my home address for the paperwork, and a statement had arrived in my mailbox 3 weeks earlier that I'd set aside without opening because I didn't recognize the account number. She spread everything out on the dining room table on Saturday evening and walked me through it page by page. When she finished, she looked up at me with her mother's eyes. Dad, she said, this is theft. Not a misunderstanding. Not a bad judgment call. Theft. I already knew. But there's something different about hearing it said clearly by someone who loves you. That night, after my son and his wife came home from wherever they'd been, I asked them both to sit down at the dining room table. Renee sat beside me. The papers were face down on the table. My son looked wary. My daughter-in-law looked confident. The way people look when they've rehearsed a conversation in their heads and believe they already know how it goes. She was wrong about how it was going to go. I turned over the papers, one at a time. The credit card statement, the account statements, the photographs of missing items. My son's face changed with each page. His wife went very still. I'm going to ask each of you one question, I said, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. I looked at my daughter-in-law first. Did you take Carol's jewelry from the box in my closet? Silence. Did you open a credit card in my name? More silence. I turned to my son. Did you open that account? He looked down at the table. His jaw was working like he was searching for words that weren't there. I needed it to be separate, he said finally. Just until we got stable. Stable, Renee repeated quietly. I put my hand flat on the papers. You opened a fraudulent credit account in my name. You have been selling my property without my knowledge or consent. In some of those items were things that belonged to your mother. I paused. I want you to understand what I'm holding right now. This is enough to go to the police tonight. My daughter-in-law's voice came out thin. Gerald, we can explain. I'm not asking for an explanation, I said. I'm giving you a choice. I looked at both of them steadily. You have 48 hours to move your things out of my house. Renee has prepared a document for you to sign, which acknowledges the account in my name and sets up a repayment schedule. You sign it tonight, you leave peaceably, and I won't involve law enforcement. You refuse, or you leave without signing, and I call the detective I already spoke with this afternoon. My daughter-in-law's face went white. You already called. I made a phone call. Yes. My son raised his eyes. They were red. Dad, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. She said it was just borrowing, that we'd replace everything before you noticed. I looked at him for a long moment. This was still my boy. The same kid who used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives and wake up confused and reach for my hand without even thinking about it. That didn't disappear, but it didn't erase the rest of it either. I believe you're sorry, I said. But sorry doesn't return your mother's jewelry. Sorry doesn't unring that bell. I slid the repayment document across the table. Sign it. They signed. Renee had it notarized the following morning. The 48 hours passed in a strange, heavy quiet. My daughter-in-law packed efficiently and without looking at me. My son packed slowly. On the morning of the second day, when the last box was in the car, he stood at the front door with his hands in his pockets and said, "Are we done? As a family?" I thought about that for a moment. "You're my son," I said. "That doesn't stop. But this chapter is closed, and the next one starts with honesty. Every part of it." I stepped forward and put my hand briefly on his shoulder. "You want to rebuild that? You know where I am." He nodded. He didn't look back at the house when he walked to the car. I watched them drive away from the front porch, the same porch where Carol had sat with me on that October afternoon 4 years ago, and when the sound of the engine faded, the quiet that came back wasn't empty anymore. It was clean. Before I go any further, I want to thank you for being here and for listening. If this story has touched something in you, I'd ask you to subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because the next story I'm about to tell you goes even deeper. A story about a woman who disappeared from my life for 9 years, then came back the moment she heard a number with several zeros in it. A woman who thought I was too old, too soft, and too alone to see through the performance she put on at my front door. She had no idea what I had waiting for her. Before I tell you about her, I should tell you who I became in the years between those two stories. After my son left, I spent about 3 months simply getting reacquainted with my own house. I rehung every photograph. I replaced the lock on the small room off the hallway. I couldn't get Carol's sewing machine back, but I found the same model, a 1964 Singer, in nearly identical condition, at an estate sale about 40 miles away. It took me an entire afternoon to clean and oil it. When it ran for the first time on my workbench, making that low, steady mechanical hum, I sat down on a stool and cried for about 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, carried it to the sitting room, and set it in the corner where it belonged. I am 67 years old. I live alone. My knees hurt and I don't always sleep well, and I still set 2 coffee cups out in the morning sometimes before I catch myself. But I am not lost. I am not confused. I am not an easy mark for anyone who assumes that grief makes a man weak. My younger sister passed the winter before all of this happened, and in her will she left me a piece of land outside of Asheville that had been in our family since our grandfather's time. I had no intention of selling it, but I hired a surveyor and an appraiser just to understand what I had. The appraiser's number was higher than I expected, considerably higher. I didn't tell anyone, or so I thought. My daughter, Renee, was the only person I'd mentioned it to in passing, and she kept that information the same way she keeps everything close and quiet. But somehow, within 3 months of the estate being settled, my other daughter knew. Let me explain. I have 2 daughters, Renee, who I've already told you about, and a younger one, Diane, who is 41 years old and has been, for the better part of 9 years, a stranger to me. Not by my choosing. After Carol's diagnosis, Diane became distant in a way that was hard to explain at the time and clearer in hindsight. She and her husband had their own lives, their own pressures, and somewhere in the middle of her mother's illness and the years that followed, the calls got shorter and the visits stopped entirely. I tried. I tried longer than most fathers would have. I sent cards. I left messages. On her birthday, 2 years running, I drove 2 hours to her neighborhood, only to find she wasn't home. And not by accident. After a while, I stopped trying. Not because I stopped loving her, because love requires some kind of door to knock on, and hers had been shut for years. 9 years is a long time. You change in 9 years. Your face changes. Your posture changes. The way you hold yourself in a room changes. I had changed. I wasn't the same man who'd left apologetic voicemails and driven 4 hours round trip to leave a birthday card in a mailbox. I was the man who had locked my bedroom door against my own son, who had built a legal case on my kitchen table, who had looked at 2 people I trusted and said, "This ends tonight." So when the black sedan pulled into my driveway on a Tuesday morning in March, and I watched Diane and her husband step out with the careful, practiced casualness of people who have rehearsed their entrance, I was not the father she remembered. I just looked like him. She wore a coat I didn't recognize and an expression I did, that particular mix of warmth and strategy that I'd seen on her face at the age of 12 when she wanted something she thought I might say no to. Her husband walked a half step behind her, hands in his pockets, looking around my property with the quiet attentiveness of a man doing arithmetic in his head. "Dad," she said when I opened the door, and the word came out soft and a little breathless, like she was surprised by how it felt to say it. "You look great." "Diane," I said. "It's been too long," she said. "It has," I agreed. Her husband reached out his hand. I shook it. He had a good handshake, firm and rehearsed, the kind of handshake a man practices. "We were in the area," Diane said, and I thought, I don't know. I just thought it was time. "Don't you think it's time?" I stepped back from the door. "Come in." I made coffee. They sat at my kitchen table and looked around with a certain kind of assessment that they were doing their best to hide and not quite managing. Diane's eyes moved to the photographs on the wall, to the framed insurance papers above my desk that she probably mistook for something else, to the property survey map I'd left partially visible on the counter. "This is a beautiful home," her husband said. "It is," I said. "Renee mentioned you've been here alone since all of it," Diane said carefully. Since before Mom, I said. "But yes, that's a lot of house for one person," she smiled. It was warm, and I recognized it was real. That was the complicated part. Some of what she was doing was genuine. Some of it was theater. The hard thing about people who use you is that the love and the using often live in the same space, and you can't always separate them cleanly. "It suits me," I said. Her husband leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "We heard something happened with your son. I'm sorry about that. That must have been rough." I looked at him. "Who told you that?" He glanced at Diane. She looked at her coffee. "It just got back to us," she said. "Small family. Word travels." "It does," I said. "We wanted to make sure you were okay," she said. "That you had people around you. You know how I feel about you being isolated, Dad. It's not healthy. Especially at your—" She stopped. "My age?" I asked pleasantly. She smiled, caught. "I was going to say, especially with everything you've been through." I nodded slowly. The coffee was getting cold. Outside, a cardinal landed on the back fence and sat there for a moment before lifting off again. I watched it go. "Why are you here, Diane?" I asked. She blinked. Her husband shifted in his chair. "I told you. I know what you told me," I said. "I'm asking what I didn't tell you, because I've been in this house for 9 years without a visit, not one, And now you're here on a Tuesday morning in March. So I'll ask you again, directly, because we're past the age of dancing around things. Why are you here? The silence lasted several seconds. Her husband cleared his throat. We've been going through a difficult stretch financially. The housing market hit us harder than we expected. We had a couple of investments that didn't. How much? I asked. Dad, Diane started. How much? I repeated. Her husband looked at the table. We're behind on the mortgage. About 4 months. And there's some other debt. We thought we heard about the Asheville property, and we just thought maybe. Who told you about that property? Another glance between them. Dad, that doesn't really. It does, I said. Diane's voice went small. I heard it from a cousin at the family reunion last summer. I hadn't been to the reunion last summer because no one had told me it was happening. I didn't say that. I stored it the way I'd learned to store things, quietly, for later. So you heard I had something of value, I said, and you decided this was the moment to reconnect. Diane's eyes filled. And here's the thing about tears, they can be genuine and still be deployed strategically. I don't know if she made the choice consciously, but I know the timing. I know how this looks, she said. I think you do, I said. But, Dad, I have missed you. That's real. Whatever the circumstances are, whatever brought us here today, I have genuinely missed you. I believed her. That was the hardest part of all of it. I believe you, I said. She reached across the table for my hand. I let her take it. Then help us, she said quietly. Please. I looked at her for a long moment. She was 41 years old. She had crow's feet at the corners of her eyes and a tiredness in her face that hadn't been there 9 years ago. She was my daughter, Carol's daughter. Whatever else was true, that was true. I took my hand back slowly. I'm going to tell you something, I said, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. She nodded. I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened the middle drawer and took out a folder, thinner than the one I'd built against my son, but precise. I carried it back to the table and set it down without opening it. After your Aunt Margaret's estate was settled, I said, I had a conversation with Clifton, my neighbor, who practiced real estate law for over 3 decades. He recommended that I document my assets carefully. I followed his advice. I also had a conversation with a financial advisor about protecting those assets from any claims that might arise, legitimate or otherwise, from family members. Her husband's face had gone carefully blank. I also had a conversation, I continued, with a private investigator named Howard, who did some background research for me as a precaution. Howard is very good at what he does. I opened the folder. He found that your mortgage is not 4 months behind. It is 7 months behind, and there is a lis pendens filed against the property. He also found that your husband's former business partner filed a civil claim against him last year for misuse of company funds. That case is still pending. The kitchen was completely silent. I also found, I said, turning to the last page, that someone hired a notary service 3 months ago to request a copy of my current will from the county clerk's office. That request is logged. Howard got me the name on the request. Diane's face had gone pale. Dad, was it you? I asked. Not loudly, not accusingly, just a question. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. I closed the folder. I folded my hands on top of it and looked at both of them. Here's what I want you to understand, I said. I am not a wealthy man. I am a comfortable man. There is a difference. And whatever I have, whatever that property is worth, however my affairs are organized, that is my business, not yours. And it will be distributed according to my wishes when the time comes, which is not now and is not your decision. Her husband opened his mouth. I raised one hand, just slightly, and he closed it again. I also want you to understand, I said, that the 9 years you spent away from this family cost something. Not something I'm going to hold over you forever, but something real. And a single Tuesday morning visit, even a genuine one, does not balance that account. Diane was crying quietly now, her hands flat on the table, not reaching for anything. I'm not going to give you money, I said. Not today, and not as a transaction for your presence in my life. That's not what love is. I paused. But I'm also not going to send you away and tell you we're finished. Because you're my daughter, and because your mother, if she were sitting at this table right now, would tell me not to be a hard man when I don't have to be. I stood up again and walked to the counter. I wrote down a name and a phone number on a piece of paper and brought it back. This is a housing counselor who works with families facing foreclosure. She's very good. She helped a family on this street 3 years ago and they kept their home. I set the paper in front of Diane. Call her this week. Not next week. This week. And your husband needs to address that civil claim. Not ignore it. Not delay it. Address it. Clifton has a referral. He said he'd pass along if needed. It won't be cheap, but it will be cheaper than letting it sit. Her husband looked up at me for the first time in several minutes. And, I said, sitting back down, if you want to rebuild something with me, you do it right. You call. You visit when you say you're going to visit. You show up at Christmas without me having to ask. You treat this relationship like it matters, not like it's a resource. I looked at both of them steadily. If you can do that, genuinely do it, then we have something worth building. If you can't, then today is a courtesy call, and we both know it. Diane picked up the piece of paper I'd given her. She held it in both hands and stared at it. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. After everything? Why are you being this? She stopped. Kind? I offered. She looked up. Her eyes were red. Your mother asked me not to let grief make me into something small, I said. I've spent 4 years trying to figure out what she meant by that. I think what she meant was this. Grief can make you afraid. It can make you tight and closed and suspicious. Or it can make you clear. It can strip away all the things that didn't matter and leave you with only the things that do. I gestured at the room. This house. The people I love. The truth. Those are the things that matter. Not being right. Not making people suffer for what they've done to me. Just the truth. Diane stood up from the table. She walked around to my side and stood there for a moment, and then she put her arms around me the way she used to when she was small, her face pressed against my shoulder. I sat very still. After a moment, I put one hand on her back. Her husband said nothing. He stared out the window at the backyard with the expression of a man reassessing a situation he thought he understood. After she pulled back, she wiped her face with her sleeve and said, I'm going to call the counselor. Good, I said. They left about an hour later. I walked them to the car. Diane hugged me again at the door of the sedan and said she'd call at the end of the week. I told her I'd answer. I stood on the porch and watched them back out of the driveway and down the street. The cardinal came back to the fence post, sat there for a moment, and disappeared again into the tree line. I went inside and washed the coffee cups. I put the folder back in my desk. I walked down the hallway to the small room, the one that was Carol's, and I stood at the doorway the way I sometimes do, looking at the singer in the corner, at the button box I'd bought to replace the one that was gone, at the half-finished quilt someone else had started on a frame in the back. I haven't become a man who forgives easily. I've become a man who forgives deliberately. There's a difference. One is weakness, wearing the costume of grace. The other is a choice you make with your eyes open, knowing full well what it costs and deciding to pay it anyway, because the alternative is carrying something heavy for the rest of your life. My son calls on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, but most. We talk about small things, the weather, a baseball game, a repair he's making to his apartment. We haven't talked about what happened in any depth, not yet. Maybe someday, maybe not. Some things don't require a full excavation to be laid to rest. Diane called the housing counselor. She told me when she called at the end of that same week. They kept their house. Her husband settled the civil claim. It took almost a year and cost them considerably, but it's done. She visited in the fall, without her husband, just for a weekend. We sat on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee and watched the light change over the yard. We didn't talk about the Tuesday in March. We talked about her mother, about things she remembered from when she was little, about the quilt on the frame in the back room. I told her Carol had started it for someone and never finished it. She asked if she could learn to finish it. I said yes. There's a lesson in all of this, if you're looking for one, though I'm not sure I'm the right man to be handing out lessons. What I know is this. Growing old does not make you a smaller target. It makes you a more experienced one. The people who assume otherwise, who look at the gray hair and the slow walk and the quiet mornings and think they see something easy, have made a calculation error. Because what age gives you, if you let it, is patience. And patience, in my experience, is the sharpest thing a person can carry. They thought they were dealing with an old man who wouldn't notice, wouldn't fight back, wouldn't be ready. They were wrong. Every one of them was wrong. Tell me in the comments, would you have handled it the same way? And if you haven't already, subscribe to Arcane Vengeance for more stories like this one, because the quiet ones always have the most to say.